Algebra 2, Triangle Trig Notes, Part 2. So we're going to continue on with our Triangle Trig unit for a little bit. We set up triangles. We solved trig equations. But now we're going to do both of those. We're going to set up and we're going to solve. So what we're going to need for today is we're going to need to remember the three trig functions. Sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. And tangent is opposite over adjacent. So those are the three main trig ratios. Okay. So we're going to use those three to find missing sides, and we're going to find missing angles. Okay. So again, kind of combining the previous two parts into one. All right, so these are all for right triangles. If you are missing a side of a triangle, of a right triangle, then to find that missing side, the first thing you want to do is you want to label everything that you know, or all parts of the triangle, in terms of a given angle. Okay. So that given angle should not be the right angle. It should be one of the other angles. Okay. So some angle has to be given to you. That's not the right angle. And we're going to label everything in terms of that angle. Okay. All right, and then secondly, you'll set up a trig ratio, one of the three we wrote above, sine, cosine, or tangent, not triangle, a trig ratio. With one known and one unknown. So those are going to be the sides. You're going to have one side that is known and one side that is unknown. Then you would solve. All right, so on this first problem, we got a right triangle. We know we have the right angle. We have an angle of 32 degrees. We have a side of x, which is what we're trying to find. And we have a side of 11. Okay. So in terms of this 32 degree angle, because that's the angle we know. Okay. That's going to be our theta. We're going to label everything in terms of that. Okay. So the x is across from the right angle. Across from the right angle is always the hypotenuse. So I'll just put a big H there. All right, hypotenuse. The side that we do know is across from the angle that we're given. Okay. Or rather, it's opposite of the angle we're given. Okay. Which means that this last side would be the adjacent side. Now that adjacent side's not labeled, so we don't really need to do anything with it. Because remember, we need the one known and one unknown. Okay. So our one known is going to be that opposite 11. And our unknown is going to be the hypotenuse of x. Okay. So you have to decide which trig function uses opposite and hypotenuse. Okay. It's going to be sine. So we'll set up the sine trig ratio. The sine of an angle, okay, and the angle we're using is 32. The sine of 32 degrees is equal to the opposite side divided by the hypotenuse side. So it's the ratio of the opposite side, which is 11, divided by the hypotenuse side, which is x. So that's the equation we need. Now we have the setup, so now we just have to solve. If you remember from last week, we said that if you have a variable in the denominator of a trig function, you can simply swap these two positions. So if the sine of 32 is 11 over x, that means x is going to equal 11 divided by the sine of 32. Which you're going to have to punch into a calculator. And you'll find out that 11 divided by sine of 32 degrees is 20.8. So that is our missing side, our x. Now again, your answer should make sense. If you have a side length of 11, you shouldn't have a side length of like 5,000. Okay. The hypotenuse is always the longest side, so it shouldn't be smaller than 11. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But your answer should make sense in the context of the problem. All right, this next one. Again, label everything in terms of the given angle. So the given angle in this one is 75. So it's this bottom right angle. So directly across from the 75 would be the opposite side. Directly across from the right angle is always the hypotenuse. And then the third side is going to be adjacent. So next to, but not across from the given angle. Alright, so what do we know? Or what's our one known or our one unknown? Our unknown is the opposite side. And our known is the 21. It's the adjacent side. So this one's not involving the hypotenuse. So you have to figure out which trig function uses opposite and adjacent. That's going to be tangent. So the trig ratio we set up is going to be the tangent of the angle, so 75 degrees. And it's going to be equal to the ratio of the opposite side divided by the adjacent side. The opposite side is x, the adjacent side is 21. Alright, now remember from last week, if your unknown is on top of the ratio, then you would just multiply both sides by the denominator. So x in this case is going to equal, you would multiply both sides by 21. It would be 21 times the tangent of 75. Okay. Again, just throw that all into the calculator. 21 times tan 75, and you should get x equals 78.4. Okay, so that is for missing sides. Label what you know, figure out which trig ratio to use. Okay, so if it's opposite in hypotenuse, it's going to be sine. Adjacent in hypotenuse, it's going to be cosine. And opposite and adjacent would be tangent. And then set it up and solve. Alright, now the second scenario you could run into is you might be missing an angle. Similar steps when you're missing an angle. If you're missing an angle, you want to label the sides that you know. Okay, so if you're missing an angle, that means you don't know anything besides the right angle. So you'd label the sides with respect to the missing angle, if it's labeled. Set up the trig ratio that uses those sides. So again, if it's the opposite and adjacent, or opposite and hypotenuse, or adjacent and hypotenuse, pick whichever the appropriate trig ratio. And then remember, if you're missing an angle, you have to use the inverse trig functions to solve. So on the calculators, it would be second sine or second cosine. And you would just type in that fraction, and it should give you an angle out. Alright, so in these two examples, we have a missing angle. It's labeled theta. You want to label the sides that you do know. So on both of these we have a missing angle and we have two known sides. In this problem, the known sides, well, we know the one across from the right angle, that's always the hypotenuse. The one across from the missing angle is opposite. We don't know that one, but I'm still going to label it. So if that's opposite and that's hypotenuse, that means this last side has to be adjacent. So the ratio we need, the inverse trig function we're going to need, is whichever one involves the adjacent side and the hypotenuse side. And that, of course, is going to be cosine. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So set up the ratio. Cosine of angle theta, okay, again, that's our variable in this case, is equal to the adjacent side divided by the hypotenuse side, 12 over 19. Now again, if you need to get the angle by itself, you have to use the inverse trig function of that. Okay? Because you can't just divide by cosine. It's a function rather than a number, an expression. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the inverse cosine of the other side, of really both sides. We're going to do inverse cosine of 12 over 19. So again, on the calculator, that would just be second cosine 12 over 19. And you should get 50.8 degrees. Okay. Again, you need to do that on a calculator, no other way. All right, same thing on the next one. Figure out which angle is missing. It's the one, these are all labeled theta. Figure out what sides you know. We know the opposite side. Across from the right angle is always the hypotenuse side. We don't know that one. And then the last side is going to be adjacent. So we're going to be using adjacent and opposite. Those are the two known sides. So which trig ratio uses opposite and adjacent? That's going to be tangent. So that means the tan of this unknown angle, theta, is going to be equal to opposite over adjacent, 17 over 18. And again, you can't just divide by tangent, so what we do instead is we take the inverse tangent. We take tan inverse, second tangent of 17 over 18. And for this one, we get 43.4 degrees. Okay, so that's a couple of each types of problems. The setups are very similar. Label what you know, figure out which trig function you have to use, and then solve either for the missing side or the missing angle. Okay. Make sure to check Google Classrooms for any work that we'll have. Have a great day.